It was Halloween night, and I was home alone. My wife had taken the kids out trick-or-treating in the neighborhood while I handed out candy to the occasional groups of costumed kids who came to our door. As the night went on, the groups coming by got fewer and farther between. I figured most of the kids had finished up and gone home for the night. My house was located on a quiet suburban street. We'd lived there for years without any major incidents, but something about being home alone on Halloween night always creeped me out a bit. I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister could be lurking right outside in the darkness. I decided to pull up the footage from my front porch camera on my phone to ease my paranoia. My porch was small, with just enough room for a couple of jack-o'-lanterns that my wife had carved. The camera pointed straight out from the front door, giving a view down the walkway and street. As I scrolled through the footage, I could see the occasional groups of kids in costumes walk up, holding out their bags eagerly for candy. Everything seemed normal. But just as I was about to exit out, something caught my eye. Around 9:15, the camera picked up a figure standing completely still at the end of my walkway, half obscured in shadow. I felt a chill go down my spine. There was something deeply unsettling about the way it just stood there, barely visible in the darkness. No kids had walked by for at least 10 minutes at that point. What was this thing doing there? I replayed the footage and watched closely as the figure seemed to emerge from the shadows. It was humanoid in shape and size, but something about the proportions seemed off. The head looked swollen and the arms gangly and impossibly long. It was difficult to discern any real features since the porch light only illuminated so much. As I stared at the screen, I began to feel true fear creeping up on me. The figure's head turned ever so slightly in the direction of the camera, as if it knew it was being watched. But it made no move toward the house. It just continued standing there, half cloaked in shadow, watching and waiting. I switched to the live footage but saw nothing unusual. Had it left, or was it still out there biding its time? I kept turning on lights throughout the house and checking doors and windows. Everything seemed secure, but I couldn't erase the image of that thing from my mind. Just then, I heard a loud thump from the side of the house, followed by the sound of shuffling footsteps. I froze, listening intently. The sounds seemed to move across the yard toward the back door located off our kitchen. Thump, drag, thump, drag, like something heavy was being moved. My heart pounded as I grabbed a flashlight and kitchen knife. I crept toward the back of the house and peeked out the window, but it was too dark to see anything. The motion sensor light had failed to trigger. I unlocked the back door and stepped out onto the small porch landing. My hands shook as I shone the flashlight beam across the yard. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound intimidating. Only silence followed. Cautiously, I stepped off the landing into the damp grass. I swept the light across the yard once more. Nothing. Then I heard a creak come from directly above me. I looked up and came face to face with two glowing red eyes peering down at me from the roof. I cried out and stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. The thing let out an unearthly wail that pierced the silence of the night. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I turned and ran back inside, slamming the door shut behind me. I locked it and pushed a chair under the handle for good measure as I heard the shuffling footsteps move back across the roof. My chest heaved as I tried to calm my panicked breathing. What the hell had I just seen? This couldn't be real. Monsters aren't real. I must be losing it. Just then, my phone lit up with a call from my wife. I answered with a shaky, "Hello?" "Hey, we just finished up and are on our way back," she said cheerfully, oblivious to my terror. "The kids got so much candy. How are things there?" I stumbled over my words as I tried to describe the strange events of the evening, while still clinging to some illusion of normalcy. I didn't want her rushing home and putting herself or our kids at risk. Yeah, it's been quiet here for a while," I said unconvincingly. "Drive safely and take your time. See you soon." She laughed. "Okay, weirdo. See you in a bit." I set the phone down and tried to regain my composure. I had to protect my family. I heard heavy footsteps dragging across the roof again, moving toward the front porch this time. The reality of the situation finally sunk in. This was really happening. And that thing, whatever it was, seemed intent on getting inside my house. I ran to the front door and locked the deadbolt. I knew it wasn't much against this thing, but I had to do something. I considered calling the police, but what would I even tell them? That some monster was stalking my house? They'd think I was crazy. The slow, heavy steps continued their deliberate path across the roof before stopping right above the front door. Silence followed. The only sound was my own labored breathing in the dark house. A low guttural moan emanated from the rooftop, something scraping against the shingles, then thump. The entire frame of the front door shook violently as if it had been hit by a battering ram. Thump. The wood cracked and splintered. Thump. Hinges gave way, screws popping out from the force. I dropped the flashlight and stumbled back as the door finally burst open. The thing was inside. All I could make out was a dark mass crawling along the ceiling toward me, its limbs twisted at impossible angles. I turned to run, but tripped over my own feet. Helpless, I looked up and saw it now looming over me, grotesque and misshapen in the shadows. As it reached for me with its gnarled claw, I squeezed my eyes shut and screamed. Suddenly, the hallway flooded with light. There were noises and footsteps. Loud, familiar voices called my name. Still in a state of shock, I opened my eyes and saw my wife and kids surrounding me, their faces etched with concern. The door showed no sign of damage, no strange creature anywhere in sight. "Honey, what happened? What's going on?" my wife asked, grabbing my shoulders, her eyes searching mine for answers. I stammered, unable to form a coherent thought in my shaken state of mind. Had that all been some horrific hallucination? A waking nightmare? Or had that thing vanished back into the darkness as quickly as it came, leaving no trace? There was no rational explanation. No way my family would believe any of it, even if I tried to describe the unimaginable horror I thought I had witnessed. I'm not sure. I must have fallen asleep watching a scary movie or something, I muttered. It was the only thing I could think to say that wouldn't make them believe I was losing my grip on reality. "Well, it's over now. Just a bad dream," my wife said soothingly as she helped me to my feet. "Let's get you to bed." I nodded silently. I wanted desperately to believe her words, to chalk it all up to some twisted nightmare. But deep down, I knew something had been inside my home tonight. Something not of this world that we were never meant to see, and it could easily return when we least expect it. As I lay in bed that night, every creak of the old house made me flinch. I knew I wouldn't sleep a wink. The image of its glowing red eyes peering from the darkness seared into my mind. Maybe I should have warned my family, told them we needed to get out of this house and far away from here. But it was too late for that now. All I could do was wait helplessly in the dark and hope that whatever came into our home on Halloween would continue to lurk far from our sight. Never glimpsed in full, only felt through the unease that now seemed to permeate the very walls around us. I can only pray it remains that way, but my gut tells me this night will not be the last encounter. Something was invited in that cannot be uninvited, and it may have already laid claim to more than just the shadows. I'll never forget that Halloween night when I was 12 years old. It was supposed to be a fun night of candy and costumes with my friends, but trick-or-treating took a terrifying turn at the creepy house on Haverford Lane. My buddy Jake and I always liked hitting up Haverford Lane on Halloween. The street was lined with big old Victorian houses decorated with fake spider webs and fog machines. Everyone handed out full-size candy bars. It was the best haul in town. But none of the houses compared to the one at the very end of the street. The worn path leading up to the porch was choked with dead leaves and overgrown bushes. The windows were covered with heavy drapes, giving the impression no one had lived there for decades. Of course, we never saw a single trick-or-treater brave enough to knock on the door. The place had always given me chills. "Dare you to ring the doorbell this year," Jake said to me as we surveyed the street. I replied, "No way, not going up there," shaking my head. "I'll give you all my Twix bars," he offered with a sly grin. I hesitated. That creepy house was the last unchecked box on our trick-or-treating list. And hey, free candy bars. Before I could overthink it, I marched up the front walkway lined with crumbling statues and dying trees. My heart pounded as I reached toward the tarnished doorbell button. Just before I pushed it, the heavy front door slowly creaked open several inches. I froze, unsure what to do. "Trick or treat," I squeaked in a shaking voice. Silence answered. Jake now stood behind me, wide-eyed. He said, "Guess no one's home," laughing nervously. "Let's hit the next house." But something compelled me forward. I nudged the door open wider with my plastic pumpkin bucket. A blast of cold, stale air hit me. The dark foyer yawned open, leading to a central staircase. Cobwebs draped every surface and dust choked the air. "Don't go in there," whispered Jake harshly. Ignoring him, I crept over the threshold. The scariest haunted houses were always disappointingly boring once you were inside. I made my way down the hall, floorboards groaning underfoot. Framed portraits lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow me. A thin layer of dust-coated, decaying furniture covered in white sheets. "Anyone home?" My voice echoed through the silent house. I paused, listening. Then I heard it. The soft crying of a child, drifting from somewhere above. I froze, unsure if I was imagining it. The hairs on my neck stood up as the cries grew louder and more distinct. Jake grabbed my shoulder. "Dude, we need to get out of here," he pleaded. I brushed him off, moving toward the grand staircase. The crying became interspersed with small coughs. A kid was up there alone, hurt or in trouble. I had to help. I took the rotting steps 2 at a time, each one creaking precariously under my weight. The crying led me down a long hallway lined with closed doors. I followed the sound to the last room on the left. "Hello? Are you okay?" I called out. The cries took on a panicked edge. I slowly turned the crystal doorknob and pushed open the door. Inside, the room was completely empty. No furniture, no lights, no windows, only blank walls and scuffed wooden floors. The cries had fallen silent. "What the?" I breathed. Where had they gone? The room was a dead end. There was nowhere to hide. Unease washed over me. Jake stood frozen in the hall, eyes darting around nervously. I scanned the bare walls, noticing black scorch marks reaching up to the ceiling. In the very center of the room, the wooden floorboards were charred and ashy. My mind flashed to terrifying images of flames engulfing this empty room, a child trapped and crying for help. The air suddenly felt heavy. We had to get out of there. I rushed back into the hall, grabbing Jake's arm. We bolted toward the stairs. The cries abruptly started up again from inside the room, growing louder and more anguished. Jake yelped in fear. We scrambled down the steps, nearly falling in our haste. The wails echoed through the house at an ear-splitting volume. It felt like the walls were closing in on us. We burst out the front door and didn't stop running until we were a block away. Panting and trembling, we looked back at the house. The door was shut once more, the yard still and silent. No signs of ghostly children. Had we just imagined everything? It had felt so real at the moment. We never spoke about that night again. But it has haunted my dreams ever since. I'll hear a child cry out and turn to find nothing there. The image of that empty, scorched room lingers in my mind. Sometimes I even think I hear the echoes of those cries when I walk past that house on Haverford Lane. I've never been sure what we encountered there, but I know for certain that abandoned house is cursed with something evil. The thing that lured me inside on Halloween so many years ago. It's still in there waiting for the next fool that dares to knock on its door. I should start by saying that what I'm about to tell you is completely true. I'm not the type to make up stories for attention or anything like that. I guess I just need to get this off my chest because it's been haunting me ever since that night last Halloween. Let me give you some background first. I grew up in a nice suburban neighborhood outside of Chicago. Very safe, very normal. The kind of place where nothing exciting ever happens. Well, except for that one legend all of us kids grew up hearing about. They say that every Halloween night, a tall man in a pale mask appears somewhere in our neighborhood. No one knows exactly where he'll turn up, if he'll be lurking behind the bushes at the end of the cul-de-sac or standing beneath the old oak tree on the corner of Maple and Elm. Some kids claim to have seen him peering in windows late at night when they're up past bedtime. But whenever anyone tries to approach him or snap a photo, he vanishes into thin air. Of course, none of us really believe the stories. We just like to spook each other with the idea that Mask Man, as we called him, might be outside waiting as we scurried from house to house trick-or-treating. But it was all for fun, just part of the Halloween spirit, right? At least that's what I thought, until last year. I was 15 at the time, old enough that I felt I'd outgrown trick-or-treating, but not quite old enough yet to go to Halloween parties with friends. Stuck in that in-between space, you know. So, my parents decided I should hand out candy to the neighborhood kids while they went to an adult costume party down the street. I wasn't thrilled to spend Halloween babysitting, but I didn't argue. Plus, there was a big bowl of mini candy bars with my name on it waiting inside. Things started out normally enough. Little princesses, superheroes, and ghosts came knocking on the door every few minutes. I'd dump candy in their bags, whip out my phone between trick-or-treaters, lather, rinse, repeat. Pretty boring. Until around 10, when the flow of kids slowed to a trickle. Every house on the block went dark, signaling that Halloween was effectively over in our neighborhood for the night. Any stragglers now would just get leftovers. I was about to dig into that candy bowl myself when I heard the creak of a floorboard on the porch. I paused, listening closely. Had a kid come to the door without knocking? I crept over to the window by the front door and peeked through the curtains. My breath caught in my throat. There, beneath the yellow pool of light from our porch light, stood an impossibly tall, thin man, dressed all in black. His face was completely covered by a stark white mask, with dark hollows for eyes and mouth. He stood there, motionless, staring straight at me. I froze. Was I really looking at the legend himself, the mythical Mask Man? As I stood there stunned, he slowly raised one long, bony finger to the mouth of his mask, gesturing for silence. Then he melted backward into the shadows and was gone. I wanted to convince myself it was just some weird prank, some creeper in a mask trying to scare me. But my gut told me I'd just had a brush with something, not of this world. I didn't sleep at all that night, or the next night either. I kept picturing that pale mask hovering outside my window. I knew I had to do something, or I'd go crazy. So, I came up with a plan. On Halloween night 1 year later, I would go looking for him. I had to know if he was real. The next 365 days couldn't pass quickly enough. Then suddenly, it was October 31st again. I told my parents I was going to a party, grabbed a flashlight, and slipped out into the darkness to begin my search. I went up and down every street in my neighborhood, shining my light into every shadowy corner. I searched until nearly midnight with no luck. Exhausted, I finally stopped to sit on the curb by the playground near my house. That's when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I sensed it before I saw it, a presence behind me. I whirled around, the flashlight beam landing directly on that horrid pale mask. He was there, lurking between the swings and the slide, watching me. I wanted to demand answers, to ask him what he wanted from me, from our neighborhood. But I couldn't form any words. I was paralyzed looking into those black, soulless eyes. Neither of us moved for what felt like an eternity. Then suddenly, he began to slowly walk toward me, stiff, unnatural, like a puppet on a string. I stumbled to my feet and started backing away, shaking my head. He kept advancing. I took off running and didn't look back. Not until I was safe inside my house with the door locked. But I know he's still out there. He's always out there on Halloween night, watching and waiting, so please, if you live around here, don't go outside after dark. Don't end up face to face with the masked man like I did, because I don't know what he will do if he finally catches you alone, and I don't want to find out.